Rebirth+Unyielding+Malicious First Daughter+Abusive Scum+Group Pet+Scum Man Crematorium+Vest+Female Qiang+Shuangwen, Reading Guide. The female protagonist is a bit weak in the early stage, with high intelligence and a home fight. Rebirth of the cruel and scumbag female protagonist Shuangwen. Black, white, cut, black, malicious first daughter versus black, crazy criticism of pure love crown prince. Xie Yun had committed many evil deeds and was ruthless in her past life. She begged her parents and forced her elder brother to pave the way for her husband's throne in order to avoid being favored. Little did she know that after that person seized the throne, he destroyed the entire Xie Yun family. For the sake of his beloved white moonlight, the man spared no expense in deposing her queen and slandering her for having an affair with a foreign man. He gave her 5 feet of white silk and strangled her to death. Opening her eyes again, she returned to her unmarried years and was about to slay the people who had harmed her in her past life one by one. In this life, Xie Yun saw and dismantled every move, slaughtered all directions, fought against malicious relatives to the end, drove them crazy, and regained everything that belonged to her. Later, she was ordered to marry into the Eastern Palace, but she never expected that the gentle and aloof crown prince would so shameless. Thinking of last night's bridal chamber, Xie Yun blushed and said, "Your Highness, the crown prince is too unrestrained. It's really a disgrace to be refined." The man looked at her with a low smile and sighed, "Xiao has been thinking for many years, and once he fulfills his wish, it is inevitable that he will lose control. I hope the crown princess." Hai Han. Chapter 1. Death Without Closing One's Eyes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Madam, please." A little eunuch walked with a 7-foot white silk in hand. In the dim and dirty cell, Xie Yun leaned weakly against the wall. His head was a bit messy, but his demeanor remained upright. Just like when she was still the queen. Xie Yun looked up at the man in front of her. There was a strong hatred between his eyebrows, as if he was about to cut the person in front of him alive. Xie Yun's gaze fell on the man, he remained silent for a while, looked up and laughed, and finally burst into tears. "Zhou Ji, how cruel you are. 20 years of marriage, how could you strangle me?" The man frowned slightly and said, "Xie Yun, it's all your own fault. Self-inflicted." Xie Yun chewed 2 words, restrained her expression, and looked up at the man. "What a self-inflicted sentence. My Xie family is full of loyalists, holding you up to this high position, resulting in a complete execution of the entire family. Xie Jiazheng is a strong and iron-willed family with a century-old reputation. Your holy decree crowns them with the sin of rebellion, making them despised by the world." The man frowned and said, "It's a great gift to leave you dead after years of marital love." "Pooh." Xie Yun spat out a mouthful of blood and splashed it on the man's shoes. "Affection. Zhou Ji, do you also deserve to say these 2 words? Cut off the heads of my parents and deliver them to me in a grand manner. Is this the sentiment you speak of?" Xie Yun's body shook and she struggled to sit, waving her hand to tidy up the wrinkles that didn't exist on her prison uniform. "My voice trembled a bit. Is it your love to stick my older brother, younger brother, and my newly engaged sister to death? Or is it the feeling of strangling my sister in law alive at the moment of giving birth? Leave the whole body. It's truly a great gift." Xie Yun lay on the ground, clenching her fists and gritting her teeth. This is the man she has loved for 20 years, the husband she has chosen 1,000 times. Zhou Ji ascended the throne with the blood of the Xie family. The Xiongnu invaded, and it was her brother who led the troops to go on the expedition. The court is uncertain, it is she who kneels down to seek civil and military officials to appease the people. What did it result in? A holy edict. The Xie family is accused of treason and their entire family is being copied and executed. What did she get? 7-foot white silk. Zhou Ji frowned and said, "You also know that the Xie family has been in power for over 100 years. I have not executed the 9 families, but I am extremely kind. Xie Yun looked up at him and said, ha ha ha. I, the Xie family, have sacrificed my head and shed my blood for you. You can sit safely in this position of the 9 and 5 sovereigns. What does it mean to be kind? The Xie family is just a bargaining chip you use to compete for the throne. It sounds so grand. The cunning rabbit is dead, the running dog is cooking. Once the great river and mountain are stable, you can cross the river and demolish the bridge. Zhou Ji, you're really cunning. Don't forget, according to the imperial edict of the late emperor, the crown prince Yan is the one who inherits the throne. Xie Yun. Zhou Ji let out a cold cry, as if stabbed in pain, you crazy woman. Xie Yun exerted a force and stumbled forward, slapping Zhou Ji hard in the face. Shut up. Xie Yun tightly gripped his dragon-patterned black robe, his eyes filled with hatred, and spat a mouthful of blood on Zhou Ji's face. Zhou Ji. The stolen things always have to be returned. Xie Yun pulled off the wooden hairpin on her head and pointed it directly at Zhou Ji's neck. Unexpectedly, before it could be inserted, the whole person was thrown out with a strong force, and their forehead hit the wall straight. Scarlet blood kept flowing down her forehead, staining her eyes filled with towering hatred. Crazy. Zhou Ji panicked and took several steps back, enduring nausea and wiping off the blood foam on his face. At this moment, a graceful figure slowly walked from the darkness. Your Majesty, is Madam crazy? Said softly and weakly. Zhou Ji turned around and painfully embraced the person, raising his hand to block the woman's eyes. Why did you come? My Empress is my legitimate sister, and it is reasonable for me to send her on the final journey. Zhou Ji gave Xie Yun a fierce glance and said, she's crazy, stay away from her. The woman gently pushed him out and said, Your Majesty, this place is filthy. You go out first and dispel the bad luck. Zhou Ji snorted coldly and left with a brush of his sleeve. Xie Yun struggled to open her eyes, but her pale face changed slightly as she saw the person coming. The tone was somewhat incredulous, is it you? The woman who came was Xie Qing, the daughter of her second uncle. Impossible. The Xie family is full of plagiarism, how could there be any survivors? It's me, big sister. Xie Qing squinted his eyes and smiled, looking at Xie Yun's pitiful appearance, feeling indescribable joy in his heart. Xie Yun was taken aback and said, How could you? Xie Qing walked forward with a smile and said, Why are you still alive? It's your big family that has been hacked all over the house. What's the relationship with our second family? The evidence of Uncle's rebellion was collected by my father. Your Majesty is kind and pardons our second wife. Today is the day when my younger sister and I will be crowned as concubines. Watching Xie Yun's sudden change in expression, Xie Qing felt even more relieved in her heart, unable to suppress the smile at the corner of her mouth. Xie Yun took a deep breath and fixed her gaze on Xie Qing. Are you the newly appointed Chen Guifei by Zhou Jixin? Xie Qing covered her lips and chuckled softly, exactly. Now that the Xie family is gone, you have been deposed from your post. Go down to the underworld earlier and reunite with them. Xie Yun clenched the wooden hairpin in her hand, her eyes bleeding with hatred. At that time, she had no choice but to marry Zhou Ji. Isn't it because her second aunt, Qiu Shi, contributed half of the credit? Seeing Xie Yun silent, Xie Qing walked forward and slowly squatted down. He whispered, when uncle and auntie beheaded, Your Majesty was watching from the stands. And the person who killed Big Brother and his companions with a cane is also Your Majesty. Xie Yun burst out laughing, words sobbing with blood. I, Xie Yun, am willing to devote myself to pigs and dogs in the next life. I curse you, these people, for eternal peace and suffering. Your son will break his belly, 10,000 arrows will pierce his heart, and 5 horses will divide his body. He will not die easily. Zhou Ji. Xie Qing. I curse you not to die easily. Looking at the crazy Xie Yun, Xie Qing's eyebrows and eyes were filled with disgust and disgust. Raise your hand and ask the eunuch to quickly take action. Two eunuchs held down Xie Yun tightly, and one of them pulled a white silk and wrapped it around Xie Yun's neck. The two tightened tightly, and Bai Ling broke the neck bone, which made a crisp sound. Even in the moment of death, Xie Yun's eyes were fixed on Xie Qing's direction. Make a poisonous oath in your heart, if there is an afterlife, all those who have harmed her will be repaid with blood and blood. Chapter 2. Rebirth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mississippi. Why are you not wearing clothes? Xie Yun slowly opened her eyes, feeling dizzy and dizzy. Looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar face in front of me, I was momentarily stunned and tentatively shouted. Pure brightness Qingming looked anxious and quickly helped the person who had fallen up, quickly putting her clothes on. Miss, are you okay? Xie Yun looked around and suddenly regained her senses. She is reborn. Her legs didn't even stand straight, she grabbed Qingming with her back hand and was about to run. In her past life, she relied on the prominent family background of the Xie family, specializing in the evil deeds of bullying women and men, and was a well-known evil woman in the capital. Today is the birthday of the Empress Dowager, which appears to be her birthday. Underneath the scenes, it's for Prince Yen and several other princes to receive concubines. Major aristocratic families bring their female relatives to the palace to celebrate their birthday, and the Xie family is no exception. I don't know who took the bear heart leopard gallbladder, drugged Zhou Ji, who was still the prince, and even knocked her unconscious and tied her up. In my past life, I didn't find Qingming here. When the empress led a group of noblewomen from the capital to find them, she lay in bed disheveled, with Zhou Ji sleeping beside her, completely naked. After blocking the crowd, the empress immediately issued an order to grant marriage. She was inexplicably embarrassed and married Zhou Ji without proper name or words. Run quickly. Xie Yun grabbed her dress and turned to look at Zhou Ji on the bed. Hold back your hatred, now is not the time to wield your hand. The master and servant had just run to the door when they suddenly heard the sound of a lock outside. Not good. The door is locked. Xie Yun was greatly surprised in her heart. Qingming rushed over and pulled the door hard, but it didn't open. Xie Yun's face sank. Today, no matter what, we cannot let the old things repeat themselves. Qingming immediately ran to the window, but the window was also locked. Girl. What should I do? Xie Yun looked around the room and noticed a candle. She can't surrender. Even trapped beasts know how to fight to the death. Not to mention being human. She strode over, grabbed the candle, and directly lit the hanging curtain. Qingming, burn all of this. Xie Yun handed the candlelight to Qingming and gave the person on the bed a fierce glance. See if it's your destiny or this fire. In no time, the whole room ignited a raging fire. Xie Yun grabbed the rosewood stool and stared straight at the big fire on the door. Hurry up, burn it up a bit faster. Suddenly, a young eunuch's urgent cry sounded outside the door. Come on, come on. We're running out of water. Come on, come on. Listening to the increasing noise outside, Xie Yun covered her mouth and nose, grabbed a small stool, and fiercely smashed the door open. Let's go. Xie Yun pushed Qingming out. At this moment, there was a loud bang from behind. The load-bearing beams on the roof were unable to withstand the fire and burned down directly. As soon as the master and servant ran out, they saw a large group of people led by the empress approaching from a distance. From afar, Xie Yun still saw clearly the proud face of her second aunt. Take it seriously, what a clever plan. Empress. Miss Xie is inside. Xie Yun and Qingming didn't run to the discharge gate when they heard the voice of a maid. The next moment, a group of nanny and father-in-law gathered around the empress and walked into the courtyard. Xie Yun hugged Qingming and lay on the ground in a disheveled state. She leaned in Qingming's ear and said, "Don't make a sound. Hurry up. Put out the fire." Empress Wang didn't look at the master and servant lying on the ground pretending to be dead, only said to quickly put out the fire. Listening to the crackling sound in her ears, Xie Yun remained motionless on the ground, quietly pretending to be dead. Queen Wang glanced at her and asked the nearby nanny to pick up the person. "Miss Xie, I'll help you up." Without giving Xie Yun any room for thought, the nanny held her in one hand and Qingming in the other. "Just lift both of them up." Xie Yun pretended to cough and then leaned weakly against the grandmother, looking innocent. "What's going on here? What happened?" The rushing crowd said. Qingming dared not speak out and learned from her family girl, leaning softly against her grandmother. "Yin Yang. You're so good here." Among the noblewomen, her second Aunt Qiu shouted loudly, fearing that no one would know her niece was here. Xie Yun looked at Qiu with a surprised expression on her face. Without saying a word, she began to cry. "Aunt Air, Yin Yang is afraid." After speaking, she stumbled and rushed over. She hugged Qiu in one fell swoop, crying her nose and tears. Still holding on to Qingming's mother's eyebrows and eyes from behind, she quickly walked towards her. Empress Wang looked at Xie Yun with a surplus of light and frowned in dissatisfaction. "There are really no rules to follow. How could my son Qiu saw that Xie Yun was dressed tightly, and the side of her neck was white and without any marks. Heart frozen, failed." She quickly hugged Xie Yun and gently patted her back to soothe her. It's okay. Aunt Air is here. Seems like a loving mother." Xie Yun's legitimate mother, Cui Shi, fell ill and was bedridden all year round, with no intention of teaching her children. Her father, Xie Rong, also fought outside for years and could only take away his two older brothers. Due to personal reasons, Xie Rong is not allowed to issue an edict and cannot return to Beijing. Xie Yun has always been personally taught by two aunts. Teaching to teach, it actually cultivates Xie Yun into a foolish person who is ignorant, bullies others, and sees men unable to walk. In her past life, she was incredibly foolish. The girls in the second and third rooms are all old ladies who go to the palace to teach and seek guidance from their mothers. With her and her younger sister, there is no need to learn anything. Such poor praise and killing caused her to suffer in a cannibalistic palace in her previous life. In this life, she wants to see how shamelessly these people will repeat their old tricks. Noticing the young girl behind Qiu, Xie Yun lowered her eyes slightly. 13-year-old Xie Qing always looks pure and white. Wearing a light white feather-patterned horse-face skirt, paired with plain green embroidered shoes, with black hair like ink, red lips and white teeth, she looked gentle and dignified. Compared to myself, wearing black and gray clothes, with one shoe missing from my feet, I put on white socks. A look of embarrassment and extreme stupidity. Xie Qing pretended to be surprised and said, "Big sister, why are you here?" Xie Yun pretended to cry enough, and her dirty hands wiped her face, turning black again. She looked dissatisfied and said, "My second sister blames you. We agreed to watch the lotus together. Why did you throw me here?" She was with Xie Qing all along until she was knocked unconscious. The ladies of the aristocratic family present could see clearly. So, now she dares to confidently deceive Xie Qing. Xie Qing's face remained unchanged, but his hands, holding the handkerchief, clenched slightly. "Big sister, don't talk nonsense. I only arrived at the lotus pond a few feet ago. As soon as I turned around, you disappeared and I don't know where you went. What a mess." Xie Yun frowned and spoke fiercely, "Stop talking nonsense. It's clearly you who left me behind." As she spoke, she lifted her sleeves as if about to take action. Xie Qing immediately raised his hand to cover his head, his tone pitiful and aggrieved. "Big sister, don't hit me. Qiu quickly stopped Xie Yun and whispered, Yun Yang, don't act around. This is the palace. It's not at home. Hee, this tone. Deeply afraid that others wouldn't know, Xie Yun had physically assaulted Xie Qing at home. Xie Yun pursed her lips and looked coquettish. Aunt Air, Sister Air is falsely accusing me. You are the one who knows Yun Yang the best. It's not Yun Yang's fault. Yun Yang won't hit anyone. Who wouldn't know how to rake it upside down? So Xie Yun hugged her arms and angrily pushed away the Qiu family. Aunt Air also falsely accuses Yun Yang and will sue her grandmother when she goes back. Qiu, who was pushed away, was a bit dumbfounded and immediately reacted, laughing and coaxing Xie Yun. Empress Wang, who had watched the farce on the side, lowered her face and said, since the fire has been extinguished, let's go back to the main hall. Everyone bowed and stepped aside to give way. Empress Xiao glanced at Xie Yun and sighed with a headache. Seeing the burnt-out room, Xie Yun's expression was somewhat complicated. Zhou Ji was burned to death like this. Before everyone could walk away, 2 people walked out of the nearby path. See mother. A deep voice sounded. And the sound fell in Xie Yun's ear, like a thunderbolt breaking through the sky. Chapter 3. Disfigurement. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Zhou Ji, who was supposed to be buried in a sea of fire, now walked out with a calm and steady demeanor. Dressed neatly on the body, and with soaked boots on the feet, there was no trace of dirt. He had a gentle and humble gaze, bowing to Queen Wang. Queen Wang smiled as she saw that it was him. Third, why are you here? Just now, I ran into a eunuch looking for water, asked a question, and came over. Empress Wang didn't doubt him and said calmly, I guess the palace maid was lazy and accidentally touched a candle. It's okay, let's go back. Zhou Ji responded, and as he turned around to leave, he looked back at the group of people behind him. He glanced up at Xie Yun at the back of the crowd. Coincidentally, Xie Yun also raised her eyes and stared at him, her eyes facing each other. Both of them had tense and cold expressions, and their eyes were full of probing. Zhou Ji, you are really cunning. Xie Yun sneered in her heart. Just now in the courtyard, she had such a big commotion with Qingming and even set fire to it. Zhou Ji, lying in bed, remained motionless. Now he is dressed neatly and pretending to have a chance encounter. What does this mean? In his past life, Zhou Ji was also clear-headed, just dragging her into the water with a plan. Or has it been planned for a long time? Xie Yun suddenly didn't know whether to cry for her pity or laugh at her foolishness. The pain of suffering in a past life. It was all calculated by someone. Unfortunately, I still closed my eyes and took big steps to jump into the pit set by others. At this thought, a cold smile appeared on Xie Yun's lips. Noticing the change in Xie Yun's expression, Zhou Ji unconsciously squeezed his hand, feeling a bad premonition in his heart. Due to fire issues, the banquet had to end prematurely. On the way back, the carriage swayed and the creaking sound of the axles echoed in my ears. Big sister. Xie Qing's gentle voice interrupted Xie Yun, who was in a daze. What's up? Xie Yun glanced at her, her gaze cold and plain, with no expression on her face. Xie Qing was covered in hair from the cold gaze, laughing a bit reluctantly, shaking his head and saying it was okay. She always feels like something's wrong, but she can't tell. The carriage was very quiet, with only the sound of breathing between the two of them. Looking at the low-legged small table by the legs, there were sharp lotus edges on the corners. Xie Yun tugged at the silver bracelet on her wrist and slightly curled the corner of her mouth. Staring sideways at Xie Qing, her radiant face exuded a faint light, so delicate that even her makeup could not be discerned. She said in a hoarse voice, "Second sister, your skin is really good." Upon hearing these words, Xie Qing turned his head to look at her and instinctively touched his face. With a pursed smile, he whispered, I've been using some hibiscus jelly lately, and it feels much smoother to the touch. Noticing the thick gold and jade circles on Xie Qing's wrist, Xie Yun's expression slightly darkened. Her mother is bedridden all year round and can't even go out. Grandmother took the opportunity to transfer the power of the butler to her second aunt, and all the servants of the Xie family were greatly changed by her second aunt. The restaurants, cloth shops, and pawn shops under the Xie family's name should all be owned by Aunt Heir. It's no wonder Xie Qing is full of luxury and precious jewels. For Ning, 2 liang can be worth 10 liang of silver coins. Xie Yun whispered softly, as the eldest daughter of the Xie family, her monthly income is only 15 taels. The carriage swayed and came to a steady stop. Xie Qing sorted out the piled-up skirts, sat straight back, and smiled at Xie Yun. Big sister, you first. You go ahead. Xie Yun looked at her dirty dress with a shy expression on her face. Fool. I'll see how grandma handles you later. Xie Qing sneered in his heart, stood up with his waist hooked, and just took a step with his foot raised. The hem of the skirt suddenly sank, causing Xie Qingmeng to turn back in shock. I only saw Xie Yun with both hands resting on her knees, looking at her in confusion. Second sister, what's wrong? It's okay. Xie Qing thought it was because of his own worries, just lifted the car curtain and didn't even lift his foot out. The whole person suddenly fell to the side, not stepping firmly on it, and fell straight onto the small table. Ah! Upon hearing Xie Qing's painful cries, Xie Yun suppressed a smile in her eyes and quickly helped the person up. Xie Qinggang looked up and felt something sliding down his face from his eyebrows. Second sister, your forehead. Xie Yun widened her eyes, her expression shocked, and her fingers pointing at Xie Qing's forehead were trembling. What's wrong with my forehead? Xie Qing shook his hands and touched the brow bone, touching a warm and damp area. When he put it down, it was all blood. Ah! My forehead. At the sight of blood, Xie Qing let out a mournful scream. The maid outside heard a scream and quickly lifted the curtain, only to see a blood hole the size of a copper coin on Xie Qing's left eyebrow. A few maids hurriedly helped Xie Qing down, while the servants and butlers shouted at the top of their voices, "Go and get a doctor." There is chaos outside, just like a pot of congee. After sitting quietly on the carriage for a while, Xie Yun saw 2 servants carrying chairs and calling her down. Looking at the magnificent entrance of the Xie family, Xie Yun stared at the plaque for a while, feeling a daze before her eyes, and suddenly smiled. The Xie family has a century-old and prestigious family, with only 30 experiences in their past lives. She watched as the Xie family rose from a flat ground, tossed and turned, and was once again doomed. It can be said that it was ups and downs, extremely exciting. She let out a slight sigh, tidied up the dirty and filthy hem of her skirt, and pulled a smile from the corner of her mouth. Miss, the old lady asked you to go to Jing'an Hall. A cold and sharp voice rang out in the courtyard, and then an old lady wearing a dark red coat walked out with a cold face. Noticing Xie Yun's disheveled appearance, her expression became even more calm, and she scolded in a low voice, "Big girl is really stubborn. She never changes her character." Then, he took a side step to make way and signaled for Xie Yun to leave first. Xie Yun rubbed her sleeves and remained silent for a while, staring at the old lady for a moment. This is the housekeeper beside her grandmother, surnamed Bai. She grew up with her grandmother from a young age and later married into the Xie family with her grandmother. On weekdays, relying on her seniority and being the steward of her grandmother's side, she always likes to put on airs and bully her mother. For a long time, Xie Yunkai said quietly, "I have always been a servant. Don't rely on my seniority and consider yourself the master." After finishing speaking, she strode towards the inner courtyard. Behind her, Bai Mama's eyes widened slightly, her expression filled with surprise. She opened her mouth and couldn't hold back a word for a while. After walking for a while, I arrived at the gate of Lady Xie's Jing'an Hall. There are many people in the courtyard, a short and chubby woman with a group of little girls kneeling in the courtyard. Xie Yun glanced at the chubby woman, her eyes twitched slightly, and then walked into the room without saying a word. As soon as she entered the room, Xie Yun instinctively clenched her fist in her sleeve. Bang! A small round blue and white bottle was smashed at the foot, with fragments splattering. Damn it! Kneel down. An old voice rang out, you uneducated fool. You've lost such a big face in the palace, and you still have face to come back. Pa! Then there was another crisp sound. Xie Yun took a sip from the tea cup that hit her forehead, and blood mixed with the tea flowed down, causing the blood-red tea to faint on her collar. The hands in the sleeves were tightly clenched, and the nails were deeply pinched in the palm of the hand. Xie Yun lowered her head, concealing the terrifying murderous intent in her eyes, and knelt down on a broken piece of porcelain. Chapter 4. Contention and Relativity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Her grandmother doesn't like her mother, and it can even be said that she hates her mother. The reason is that her mother is the daughter of the Cui family in Qinghe, whose status is comparable to that of a royal family. There is no mother.in.law who can be happy with a daughter.in.law who has a much higher status than herself. So, her grandmother is the best at picking on her mother, either verbally insulting or throwing things at people. Previously, she was most afraid of her grandmother getting angry. Firstly, she was afraid of being beaten, and secondly, she was afraid of offending her grandmother and making life difficult for herself. Now, hitting her head with this teacup is also a convenient habit. Xie Yun gritted her teeth, suppressed the sharp pain in her knees, and asked back, Grandmother, where did Yun Yang go wrong? Bold. Who taught you to talk to me like this? Mr. Xie squinted his eyes and drank his herbal tea slowly until he saw blood red on Xie Yun's knees before putting down his tea bowl. The voice was sharp and piercing. Looking at your face, it's annoying. Like your mother waiting to die, it's annoying. I don't know what to do, it's really out of sight and out of mind. The small window in the room is wide open, refreshing and cool. The tea scattered on the ground emitted a faint fragrance, mixed with the strong aroma of the house, which was stuffy and unpleasant. Xie Yun clenched her hand hidden in her sleeve, and Mrs. Xie continued to curse in a low voice. What about Cui Shi in Qinghe? She has the status of being an empress, what about that? Didn't you become my wife from the Xie family? Still bring me tea and water, bow your head and bend down. Don't think you've given birth to a few children. You can climb over my head and bully me. A daughter born to her is like a prostitute who works as a prostitute. She can't walk when she sees a man. She's despicable. She suddenly looked up and stared straight at Mrs. Xie, looking at her without saying a word. Mrs. Xie was startled by her gaze, and her back suddenly caught a chill. Bastard! What are you staring at me for? Said coldly. Xie Yun lowered her eyes and said indifferently, You're despicable. Grandmother, you're such a lowly person who just opens your mouth and closes your mouth. Who the hell is despicable? As soon as she finished speaking, Mrs. Xie immediately cursed loudly. Damn girl! Who taught you the rules? Dare to talk back to me. At a young age, you look disrespectful and shameless. You don't know how to behave shamelessly. That's how Cui taught you. Xie Yun sneered in her heart. Mrs. Xie married into the Xie family through Su Xian and was born into a small family. After giving birth to 2 sons and 3 daughters, her eyes would grow to the sky, making things difficult for her father and constantly belittling her mother and maternal family. Did Yun Yang make her mother angry again? A warm female voice came from outside. Tightly, a beautiful figure passed over Xie Yun and naturally sat on the nearby De Hong Grand Tutor's chair. Madame Xie was stirred up by the woman who came in, her face calm, holding her breath and opening her mouth to say something. The woman raised her hand and waved, but Mrs. Xie fell silent. Xie Yun looked at the woman in front of her and calmly shouted, "Third auntie." The woman paused and noticed the blood red under Xie Yun's knee. She took a glance and averted her gaze. Yunyang has been unruly since she was young. Mother, you don't know, why should you be angry? Mr. Xie glanced at his third wife, Li Shi, and his anger calmed down. He then pretended to hold a teacup and blew foam, saying, "Irregular and unruly. Walking out, it's not her face that's lost, it's the face of the Xie family." When he said this, he even raised his hand and slammed the table with a loud bang. Li immediately followed her words and said, "Why don't we just do this? Yunyang is also a big girl, so we can avoid all of this. It's better to send Yunyang to the village in the suburbs, rest well for a while, and suppress her temper." Xie Yun, who was kneeling on the ground, smiled coldly at the corners of her mouth. In a few days, it will be Shuangwen festival. Major aristocratic families in the capital will bring their families to the palace for festivals, and their in-laws are complex and intricate. Isn't it just these festivals that they rely on to sustain themselves? At this moment, send her away, intending to make Xie Qing shine at the banquet. Dreaming. Xie Yun stood up suddenly, suppressed the pain in her legs, and directly broke the jar and said, "Aunt San, what do you mean? Why did you send me to the suburbs?" As she spoke, she stumbled onto a nearby chair and said, I'm not going." Xie Yun suddenly appeared like this, and Mrs. Xie and Mrs. Li were immediately stunned, staring at each other for a moment without regaining their senses. Xie Yun grabbed the teacup at hand and slammed it onto the ground, splattering fragments. Bang! Accompanied by Mrs. Xie's screams, she panicked and covered her face with a hurried tone, saying, Someone. Li Shi didn't fall well either. A few fragments hit her arm directly, and her sleeve immediately turned red. Opening his mouth, he cursed Xie Yun and said, "Little beast." Xie Yun took a deep breath and a cold smile flashed in her eyes. These were just a few fragments, and there were several blood holes on her knee. She is already a wicked person who always seeks revenge. If she harms her, she will still be very angry. Tightly, she lifted her hand and pulled off the hairpin on her head, letting out the long hair. He shouted loudly in his mouth, "If I don't go, then I won't go. I won't go even if I die." Taking advantage of the maid's mother's absence, Xie Yun grabbed the remaining teacups and threw them one by one onto the ground. Pop pop pop. Apart from the crisp sound in the room, there were also the screams of Mrs. Xie and the Li family. The flying fragments not only pierced the arms and legs, but also scratched the cheeks, causing chaos and loss of control in the scene. It's difficult to subdue these villains all at once. Moreover, she has been used to it, these people only step down the pole. But no matter what, there will always be small profits. When the maid and mother-in-law came in, the room was full of debris and chaos. Li half hugged Mrs. Xie, with her back, arms, and legs covered in fragments of flesh. Mr. Xie also had a lot on his face and arms, trembling in Li's arms. Looking at Xie Yun, there were several bloodstains on her face and blood on her chest and arms, making her look even more tragic. The doctors invited by the butler entered Mrs. Xie's Jingyan Hall one after another. The originally cold and peaceful courtyard was quickly fried to a boil. It's not the broken lips of the maidservant, it's the screams of Mrs. Xie and Mrs. Li. Xie Yun sat in a chair, looking expressionlessly at the maids and women who were busy entering and leaving. Her gaze was fixed on the back of Bai Mama, and she gently tugged at the corner of her mouth. Shuangwen Festival has another highlight, Grandma and Aunt, you have to hold on. Bai Mama turned around suddenly and saw Xie Yun's face covered in blood, weakly curled up in a chair. Her heart trembled as she clearly felt a cold and sharp gaze just now. I went to the palace once, and this big girl seemed to have changed her personality. She was gloomy and strange, behaved well, and acted cruelly, like a demon crawling out of the abyss hell. Mammy, what are you watching me do? Xie Yun looked up at Bai Mama and asked coldly. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. Soon, a voice full of crying during Qingming sounded. Madam, the girl is inside. Immediately after, the voice of the maid from Jingyan Hall blocking the way said, Madam, you are not allowed to enter. Before the words could be finished, a cold and sharp female voice could be heard. Get lost. Are you the master or am I the master? Xie Yun's heart skipped a beat and she lifted it to her throat in one breath. Her mother Cui is here. Bang! The tightly closed carved peachwood door was kicked open from outside. Outside the gate, the woman was wearing a large red embroidered cloud-patterned robe, paired with a red pleated skirt. On his right hand, he was holding a horse whip with a thorn in it, his eyebrows and eyes cold, and his facial features beautiful and fierce. Yin Yang. Seeing Xie Yun curled up in a chair covered in blood, the woman's eyes immediately turned red. Chapter 5. Generating Gaps. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as Bai Mama saw Cui's arrival, her face darkened and she ran and smiled, saying, Madam, she is so sick that she can even kick the door and lift the whip. As the words fell, the room was filled with Mrs. Xie's sharp curses. Cui Junhua, you scumbag. Look at the scumbag you raise. You dare to climb onto my head and act recklessly. Wait for Shengguanji Dalong to come back. I must tell Dalong to dismiss you. Tell you to get out of the Xie family together with your few lowly hooves. Stop cursing, followed by the sound of smashing things. Cui Shi remained silent and walked towards Xie Yun in silence. She glanced at her and sat quietly on the side. In the room, Mrs. Xie's curses became louder and more unpleasant to hear. Wipe it off. Cui handed over the snow-white handkerchief. Xie Yun took it over and pursed her lips before saying, Mother, did I cause trouble for you? In the palace, I didn't mean to. I was just angry just now. Xie Yun is not sure what Cui Shi is thinking now, nor is she clear about her current attitude. Cui Shi looked at her troubled expression and said, It's okay, wipe your face, it's all blood. As the words fell, a crisp sound came from the room, probably due to the broken roux kiln blue and white porcelain that Mrs. Xie had been holding all day. Then came Mrs. Xie's sharp voice. Cui Shi. You're deaf. Can't you hear me? Back then, you had a heated argument about your marriage to the Rong family. As a result, in the Battle of Duanjing, when Prince Rongan passed away, you couldn't wait to seduce me, Dalong. Marry me to the Xie family with this filthy body that is now in ruins. You despicable prostitute. You have no shame. You have ruined your family. Bai Mama, give me a spank to kill this despicable prostitute. Upon hearing this, Xie Yun felt a chill in her heart. In her past life, Lady Xie even detested her mother. I have also insulted her so harshly in front of her, and mentioned those past memories. She turned her head to look at Cui Shi, only to see, Cui clenched her whip tightly, with no expression on her face, but her gaze was fixed on the blood-stained broken porcelain pieces on the ground. Bai Mama also took a few steps this way and raised her hand slightly. She spoke softly, Madam, I have offended. Bold. Cui placed the whip on the table and raised his voice. I am the mistress of the Xie family who was brought in through the main gate of the Xie family by the grace of the royal family. What qualifications do you have to hit me? Mother, are you forgetting things and you're old? You've been staying in this mansion for a long time, and I don't know how much you weigh. Although I am the second married wife, I am also your Xie family's red paper, bowing 3 times and kowtowing 9 times, with 10 miles of red makeup and 1,000 gold dowry begging me, Cui Shi. The marriage proposal with red background and black characters is still displayed in my Cui's ancestral hall. Mother, if you have the ability to curse, why not think more about how to make the wound heal faster? As soon as these words were spoken, not to mention Xie Yun, both Mrs. Xie and Mrs. Li in the room were stunned. When did Chui, who has always been weak and gentle, become so spicy? Everyone knows that Mrs. Xie is the wife of Su Xian, and her status is also that of a servant. If it weren't for climbing onto Mr. Xie's bed, it's uncertain which family would have washed her. Xie Yun took a deep breath and withdrew her surprised expression from her face. She underestimated her mother. Bai Mama's face was both surprised and fearful, and she was too scared to take a step forward. Chui's words finally fell, and the room was filled with another sound of cracking and smashing things. Mrs. Xie's angry scolding echoed directly through the Xie family's mansion, frightening out all the doctors who entered. As he left, he repeatedly said, "Only Mr. Xie is truly a shrewd master." The patriarch of a prestigious family is afraid to be a debt collector settling down. The mother and daughter exchanged a glance and smiled at each other. "Just now, your grandmother also angered you like this?" Chui remained motionless, as if unable to hear Mrs. Xie's curses and curses. Xie Yun's heart became more and more confident, and she said calmly, "That's not true. It's just that she insulted her mother, and I can't bear it." Chui glanced at her without saying a word, coughed lightly, and pushed the whip over with his hand. "I have been feeling increasingly unwell lately. Whenever I get angry, I have to rest for 10.5 days. The rest is up to you to decide." After speaking, regardless of whether Xie Yun was covered in blood or injuries, he left with his maid and mother. In law. Xie Yun is a bit dumbfounded. Bai Mama, who was standing beside her, was holding back her anger. After seeing Chui Shi leave, she began to make a fuss again. Not only did the young lady suffer from heartbreak, but the old lady also looked like a demon. "You two, the mother and daughter, are waiting for the family law to serve you when you bully the old lady like this." Xie Yun squinted her eyes. "She is very introverted. Whoever treats her well, she is gentle and obedient. Whoever treats her rudely, she is not the one to swallow her pride. God has eyes, let her live again for a lifetime, not let her live lowly." Family law. Xie Yun smiled and didn't smile. "Whoever dares to use family rules against me, I dare to kill anyone. You. Bai Mama almost fainted and pointed her finger at Xie Yun, trembling uncontrollably. "You are so rebellious and disobedient to your elders. Such rude remarks are simply outrageous." She was even more surprised in her heart. This big girl was also someone she had watched grow up with, being the most bullying and afraid of hard. She dared to be domineering towards those small families. Once faced with someone more ruthless and powerful than her, she immediately softened. These old ladies, as well as the second and third ladies who were slightly more aggressive, made this young lady behave like a quail. Xie Yun stood up straight, grabbed the whip with her back hand, raised her eyebrows, and said, "The palace suffered a life or death crisis, almost leading to a major disaster. Now I also want to see it through. I am the kind of crazy playboy. Who dares to hold on to my head? Don't blame me for not recognizing people with this whip." After speaking, Xie Yun swung his whip vigorously. Shio. The whip whipped in mid-air, as if hitting a person. "Since the jar is broken, let's throw it to the bottom." Seeing her so fierce, Bai Mama quickly bowed down to apologize and even pulled out her emotional card. He said loudly, "Grandpa and Madam have not fulfilled their daily nurturing kindness. The old lady, along with the second and third ladies, have earnestly taught you and accompanied you day and night. How difficult it is. You are so domineering and have no mercy or filial piety." Upon hearing these words, Xie Yun's first reaction was to sneer. People often say, only with kindness can there be filial piety. Without kindness, what is filial piety? How did Qiu and Li teach her? You really speak it out. In her past life, she was subjected to more than a decade of contempt and ridicule for her unruly behavior and vulgar behavior. Fortunately, she has a resilient heart and has developed a thick-skinned and hard-hearted attitude. Xie Yun took a few steps towards Bai Mama, glanced inside, and slapped her leg with a whip. Ah! Bai Mama let out a scream and struggled to retreat inside. Xie Yun twisted her handkerchief and slowly wiped off the blood on her face, putting on a playful and crazy demeanor. With a harsh and wicked tone, he said, "You lowly servant. If you keep talking nonsense, believe it or not, I'll use this whip to kill you." Bai Mama covered her bleeding leg, her eyes full of fear as she retreated inwardly, but she dared not say anything. In the past, even if the young lady was rude and unreasonable, she would never harm anyone, let alone dare to insult herself in front of the old lady. Going to the palace this time is truly a change in temperament, and the courage has become even more rebellious. Xie Yun looked at her for a while, then sneered and withdrew his whip, saying coldly, "In this room, who dares to speak ill of me again? Whether to die or live is up to one's own discretion." At this moment, she expressed her attitude by telling Mrs. Xie and Mrs. Li in the room that she is no longer the soft persimmon that can be needed by others. You. Bai Mama stuttered for a while and looked at Xie Yun, who was about to be beaten or killed, feeling extremely frightened in her heart. Xie Yun looked inside and saw that the person who had just cursed the sky was quiet at the moment, with no sound at all. She sneered in her heart that if someone really bullies the weak and fears the hard, it should be her grandmother. Just as she was leading the already frightened Qingming to leave, a gentle voice sounded from afar outside the courtyard. "Yun Yang has such a strong temper. She smashed this Jing'an hall, not to mention, but also injured her grandmother. Now she still needs to be killed or cut. What a big breath." The voice sounded like a mocking tone, but he mocked Xie Yun both inside and outside. Xie Yun was already tired, and upon hearing this, she immediately felt refreshed. She ended up like this today, unexpectedly, with this character. Her second uncle's legitimate eldest son. Xian. When Xian came in, the maid in the room was tidying up the mess on the ground. When she saw Xie Yun holding a whip, there was a large amount of blood red on the legs of the white grandmother next to her. Suddenly, she became angry and said, "Yun Yang, what do you mean? How dare you hurt Bai Mama?" Xie Yun looked at the young man with a blue head and white face who walked in and sneered. Her whole body was injured, why didn't Xian mention it? Before she could say anything, a curse rang out from outside the courtyard. "Are you all dead? Letting Yun Yang harm her mother. Haha, her second aunt has also come." Xie Yun clenched her whip and said, "Come on, everyone, come on. She wants to see what a scene tonight is." Chapter 6. Xie Yun's private meeting with an outsider. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. As soon as Chiu entered the door, she met Xie Yun's eyes and noticed that she was covered in blood. Immediately screamed and rushed over, crying and cursing in his mouth. "My son! Why are all the injuries on this body?" Immediately, he cursed loudly, "The people in this room are all blind, can't they see the blood all over the young lady's body? Call the doctor." Upon hearing this, Xian snorted coldly, "Put on a show." Xie Yun looked at her and immediately blushed, tears falling down like pearls. The tone was pitiful and aggrieved. "Enter. Yun Yang is afraid." After speaking, she hugged Chiu tightly and buried her head on her shoulder. In no time, Chiu felt a wet patch on her shoulders. Xian stared blankly at the scene before him, his face somewhat bewildered. "Not afraid. Yun Yang is not afraid." Chiu gently patted Xie Yun's back, raised an eyebrow at Xian, and pretended to be angry, saying, "Bastard." And Gu Er immediately apologizes to Yun Yang. "It's just a servant." The head of the family girl was beaten, sold, and killed. Why not? Upon hearing these words, Bai Mama next to her turned a little pale in surprise. Xian had a reluctant expression on his face and apologized. Xie Yun stopped crying, but didn't look up and said in a muffled voice, "Third brother, I was already a mischievous scoundrel. There's no need for your apology." After hearing her words, the mother and son's expressions changed again and again. Xie Yun, who used to be bullied like this by the old lady, now couldn't help but gather together and secretly hide under the covers, crying bitterly. How could it be like now, answering appropriately, behaving with moderation, and being generous? Xiu's face turned cold, and before she could speak, Li's gritting voice rang out in the room. "Second sister. Law. Come in quickly, my mother is seriously injured." Li's handle, very seriously injured, the 4 words are bitten very hard. Upon hearing this, Qiu hurriedly pushed Xie Yun away, unsure if it was due to her excessive strength or Xie Yun's lack of stability. With this push, Xie Yun fell to the ground whole, her hands pressed straight against the broken porcelain. "Ah! Big girl!" Qingming, who had been silent all along, suddenly screamed and ran over quickly. Qiu was startled and panicked, quickly following Qingming to help Xie Yun up. But Xie Yun's tender palm flesh was deeply penetrated by a few pieces of broken porcelain. The bright red and glaring blood droplets fell onto the ground along the fingertips. "Miss, your hands." During the Qingming festival, my eyes turned red, and tears streamed down my face. My tone was both urgent and angry. "From now on, I can't even touch needlework twisted tea. What should I do?" Xie Yun also looked at Qiu Shi with tears in her eyes and eyebrows, as if she couldn't believe she would push her. With difficulty, he asked, "Auntie, why are you pushing me?" After speaking, he lifted his flesh and blood-blurred hands to Qiu's eyes. Xie Yun's lips trembled and her voice was hoarse. "Aunt Air, is this blaming Yun Yang for hurting her grandmother?" A few people inside and outside were stunned by this sudden scene. Qiu immediately took a half-step back, with a surprised and angry expression on his face. The voice appeared sharp in the quiet room. "Yun Yang, what are you talking nonsense about? How could Aunt Air be willing to push you?" As soon as the words fell, big drops of tears fell. Qiu, with a look of great injustice, tightened her grip and choked her red eyes as she continued to say. "On weekdays, I wouldn't even say a heavy word to you. How could I possibly push you?" Xie Yun's teeth tightened, and her eyebrows immediately furrowed. Tears streamed down her tight jaw, dropping drop by drop. "Aunt Air, it's Yun Yang who got confused," her voice immediately weakened. "Just now, Auntie, you didn't push me. It was because I didn't stand firmly and accidentally fell." After speaking, Xie Yun panicked and clasped her hands together, carefully glancing at Qiu Shi, looking timid. The maidservants and women inside and outside were all observing and sniffing, burying their heads in their work, and their ears were fixed in a daze. Upon hearing these words, Qiu's expression sank slightly, and her pitch-black eyes stared at Xie Yun for a while. After the fire, Xie Yun looked like a different person, sharp, and her mind also lit up. Qiu Shi silently clenched her handkerchief and looked up at the people in the room. Her voice was neither light nor heavy, with a hint of coldness. The young lady was startled in the palace, which would be a bit confusing. "Qingming will help your girl back." Tears streamed down Qingming's face as she shook her hands and carefully supported Xie Yun as she slowly walked out of Jingyan Hall. Xie Yun glanced at the woman and the little maid who were still kneeling and pursed her lips. Squeezed tightly the still bleeding hands, and the pitiful eyes on his face exude a hint of killing intent in the bright white light. She leaned in Qingming's ear and whispered a few words, her eyes becoming increasingly cold and sharp. It gets dark early in spring, and Xie Yun lit a few candles in her lotus garden. Xie Yun curls up on Arhat's bed, closes her eyes and counts the time carefully. At Yushi, Qingming shook his cold air and panted as he pushed the door in. "Raise your hand and turn off the lamp at hand, making the room even darker." She whispered, "Miss, I am currently in the western suburbs and have abandoned the village. Is it over now? Are both here? Xie Yun sat up straight as her voice suddenly rose. Is that also here? Qingming understood and raised his voice. Yes, we also prepared wine and vegetables. Xie Yun coughed lightly and quickly put on her shoes before Qingming walked over. You go find me a hat enclosure, I want a bright red one. Qingming skillfully brought a hat and shawl, and carefully dressed Xie Yun. The master and servant groped in the dark and walked out from the back door in a small corner. In the dark, the people in the second and third rooms who were watching closely saw the two of them leaving the door and immediately went to find the Qiu and Li families. Li was the first to receive the news, with an indescribable shock on her face. Are you sure the big girl has gone out? The person who was watching said, It's true, the big girl is also wearing a big red dress. Someone, prepare the car. Li snorted coldly, and a happy expression climbed up her eyebrows. She finally has a handle to kill this bitch Cui. A dilapidated carriage was parked at the back door, driven by a stranger-looking servant. When the two of them came out, the curtain was immediately lifted. Xie Yun stepped on the low stool and Qingming followed in. Shaoqin, the abandoned village in the western suburbs. Qingming poked his head out and whispered to the servant. In the darkness, the carriage had just left for a while. A few grand and luxurious carriages of the Xie family walked out of the door, with a grand and mighty force leading a large number of family soldiers. In the car, Xie Yun slowly wiped the short knife in her hand. Ask whatever you want, don't have this hesitant expression, he said calmly. Qingming's face was full of fear, and his hand holding the short knife trembled uncontrollably. Miss, since you came back from the palace, you feel like your person has changed. Xie Yun looked at her calmly, with no waves in her pitch-black eyes, like a stagnant pool of water. Has it improved or hasn't it improved? Qingming hesitated for a while before whispering, Of course it has improved. The night was silent, as if a wicked beast lurking in the dark. If a person is not careful, they will stretch out their sharp claws and fangs, tearing them to pieces. The carriage stopped and Shaoqin whispered outside. Qingming's sister, everything has been arranged properly. Xie Yun lifted the hat curtain and looked through the gap at the pitch-black abandoned house. She bent down and jumped off the carriage. Without waiting for Qingming to follow, she kicked open the dilapidated door with one foot. Before the people in the room could see it, they could hear intermittent crying in constant friction. Qingming had just walked over, but before he could speak, suddenly, the dark abandoned house suddenly became brightly lit, and the noisy footsteps mixed with Li's angry voice rang out. Someone! Surround this place for me. The young lady is so bold that she dares to meet an outsider at night. Chapter 7. Reverse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xie Yun turned around, and through the hat curtain, she could clearly see Li Shi's twisted and proud expression. She is so stupid and terrifying. How could you not see the nauseating expression beneath this hypocritical face in your past life? Xie Yun's eyes became cold. Li, don't blame me for being ruthless. Yunyang, thinking that you are a junior, auntie, I will show you some mercy and let the man in the room meet with you privately. Be honest, so as not to cause trouble. Everyone is not good. Looking. Li's eyebrows and eyes held a benevolent and righteous expression, but her speech was sharp and sarcastic. Xie Yun hid behind Qingming, slowly lifting the hat curtain, and noticed the official behind Li Shi, his black eyes sinking. I thought Li was the only one who came, and without sufficient evidence, they all called the people of Jingzhou. It seems that these 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments cannot accommodate their large rooms in a day. But shouldn't they be the ones who should leave the most? It's also worth having 2 illegitimate children while climbing outside the bed. She snorted and said, Auntie, you can eat randomly, but you can't talk nonsense. Li's face suddenly became furious. She never expected that Xie Yun, who had always been weak and foolish, would dare to talk to her like this. Yunyang, what kind of virtue are you? Who in this capital doesn't know? How could I falsely accuse you for no reason? You were not in the boudoir most of the night, but you appeared here. Why didn't I falsely accuse the other girls in the family? Instead, I falsely accuse you. You haven't thought about your own reasons. Your mother is a lowly and promiscuous woman, so are you. They are all lowly and promiscuous things. It's like losing the reputation of the Xie family. Look, this is like a good girl walking on the road, tarnished by a bully. Some people still say, why does he want to forcibly occupy you and not others? It must be your fault. Who let you go out, who let you go out late at night? Xie Yun's eyes were filled with coldness, staring at Li Shi with a burning gaze. San auntie, misfortune comes from the mouth. My mother is the eldest wife of the Xie family who kneels down 9 times to beg for marriage. She is the legitimate eldest wife of the Xie family, and the genealogy is written clearly and clearly. Do you want to talk about dirty work? Those bed-crawling sluts and the children they give birth to are the dirty work. Her voice was gentle and delicate, with a calm and steady tone, but her eyes shone like sharp blades, forcing Li to take a breath. But soon, Li calmed down. She was actually scared by a half-year-old girl. The anger in the chest is even greater. Xie Yun. Grandma, she has put in a lot of effort for the Xie family. Who would have allowed you to insult her like this? Li's face turned pale, and under the dim yellow flames, her charitable face was shattered. Mother is right, you and your mother are both ungrateful despicables. The Xie family cannot tolerate such humiliation from you. Qin mama, drag out the people in the room for me. I will teach this shameless scoundrel a lesson for my sister. Law. Yes, madam. A bulky old woman walked out behind Li and walked expressionless to Xie Yun. Miss, please make way for me, said with a haughty expression. Xie Yun stared at her for a moment, then stepped aside and looked up at Li Shi, revealing a chilling smile. There are no lights in the room, the lights are dark and blazing. Qin mama led a few strong women in and quickly dragged the 2 of them hiding in the corner out. Don't drag me. A pitiful female voice rang out, tightly covering Qin mama's mouth. With a sneer, he said, you despicable prostitute. You'll have to endure it later. Wait for her to drag the 2 out and push them fiercely to the ground. Suddenly, all the lights focused on the 2 people. When Li saw the man and woman curled up on the ground clearly, her eyes widened. Shocked, then angry. Ah! How could the man inside be the 3rd uncle? Xie Yun covered her mouth in surprise and looked at Aunt San in disbelief. She exclaimed in surprise, Aunt San, isn't this your personal maid, Green Lotus? Later, she quickly called Qingming and said, Qingming covered your body with a shawl and Green Lotus, and then put on a belly bag, leaving you dead. Her voice was not loud, but everyone present could hear her clearly. You. Li was trembling all over, her eyes fixed on the man and woman on the ground, burning with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, Xie Wei. You're doing very well. Uncle San is also worried about who's not good, but unfortunately, he is worried about Aunt San's personal maid. Talking about it would be like throwing a dead man. Xie Yun continued to add fuel to the fire, Green Lotus, you are truly shameless. You have a promiscuous demeanor and dare to climb onto your master's husband's bed. You are simply seeking death. At this moment, Li's anger burned even hotter in her heart, her eyes turned red, and her fierce gaze seemed to be about to scratch the trembling Green Lotus on the ground. Someone. She gritted her teeth in hatred and said, Green Lotus is not behaving properly in private, seducing the leader. Take it back and strike 100 hard. Madam, they are all 3rd lords. Green Lotus struggled to get up and just as she reached Li's feet, she kicked her hard. Are you all dead? Drag people down. Li's face turned pale, and her eyes were fierce and terrifying, looking at Green Lotus as if she were looking at a dead person. I haven't lacked you for more than a decade to eat, drink, and reward. You just humiliated me like this. If you honestly endure this beating, I'll keep you a whole body, otherwise. Li didn't finish speaking, and the blood color on Green Lotus's face visibly faded before being dragged down by Qin Mama. If I had to say it, Aunt San still softened her heart. Xie Yun's gaze fell on Xie Wei, who was curled up in a ball, and she said calmly. This kind of despicable girl who eats from the inside out should cut off her limbs, dig her eyes and tongue, throw her into the remote mountains, and let her live and die on her own. After speaking, she slowly and leisurely led Qingming onto the carriage, leaving behind a scene of awkward and difficult people. After hearing Xie Yun's words just now, Li's face turned ugly and her gaze was gloomy. And Uncle Xie on the ground was so frightened that he dared not even come out, trembling with fear. In the morning, Xie Yun lay in bed and Qingming cooked a pot of sugar water for her. Last night, the screams and curses from the neighboring Li family's Qingwei courtyard echoed for most of the night, and it only subsided at dawn. Xie Yun had just put on her clothes when a little girl rushed in, panting heavily. Big girl, the second girl is here. Chapter 8. Saving People in Nanshan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xie Yun. The little girl finished speaking with her front foot, and Xie Qing's gritted teeth sounded from her back foot. Tightly, Xie Qingfeng walked in with a fiery expression on her face, unable to suppress her anger. Noticing the white veil wrapped around her head, Xie Yun smiled and said, "What's wrong? You can't even call me big sister." Xie Qing's face became increasingly ugly, her hands clenched tightly. San Auntie had an accident. For Xie Yun, it was harmless and elegant, but for her, it was simply causing a lot of trouble. Returning from the palace, in just 2 days, she suffered a facial injury. Her mother was also implicated in the trouble caused by her third aunt. Xie Qing was filled with anger when she thought of her grandmother pointing at her mother and cursing loudly last night. So she vented all her anger on Xie Yun. If it weren't for Xie Yun going out in the middle of the night, how could she have run into third uncle's private maid, and how could her mother have been implicated and scolded? How could these sisters at home be subjected to the ridicule of those noble women? She gritted her teeth and looked at Xie Yun with a cold expression, saying, "Are you a playboy like me worthy of being my sister?" As soon as she finished speaking, Xie Yun immediately smiled. "So who do you think can be your sister?" She didn't forget that in her past life, the person who gave her the last leg was her good sister. Looking at Xie Qing's gentle and atmospheric face, Xie Yun's lips showed a hint of mockery with a calm expression. She was really terrifyingly foolish in her past life. These people have all inserted knives into their bodies, and they are still confused and ignorant. Being fooled around. Xie Qing was taken aback by the words, not expecting Xie Yun to say so. It wasn't until later that he realized. The tone softened and he said, "Even if I despise you, aren't you still my elder sister?" Yes, even if the two of them get into a stalemate, she and Xie Yun will always be the daughters of the Xie family, both like grasshoppers on the same rope. Is it possible that Xie Yun wouldn't encounter the anger she received in the prestigious women's circle? Her marriage has been implicated, how much better can Xie Yun be? Oh. Is that right? Xie Yun made a pun and said, "My temple is small, and I can't tolerate your great Buddha. Walk slowly without seeing him off." Speaking of which, the meaning of chasing customers is most obvious. Xie Qing couldn't say anything more, almost gritting his teeth and leaving with an extremely ugly expression. After Xie Qing left, Xie Yun looked at the teacup in her hand. Today is the 10th day of the first lunar month, and there is a big event happening in Nanshan. Today, Crown Prince Zhou Yan goes up to Nanshan to burn incense and pray for the seriously ill Empress Dowager. Encountered an assassin assassinating on the way, seriously injured, with broken legs and unconscious for 3 full months. Speaking of which, she had a chance encounter with the Crown Prince. In her past life, in the palace, she was maliciously insulted and slandered by those noble women in the corner, but she was timid and cowardly, and dared not pursue it. After those noble women left, she crouched in the corner afraid of being wronged and secretly cried. And this reclusive crown prince Xie Yun ran out of nowhere, wearing a brocade robe. His shallow phoenix eyes narrowed slightly, his mouth hooked with a smile, and his eyes were burning as he looked at him. She thought Xie Yun was humiliating her. Who knew? He handed a snow-white handkerchief and gently said, "Stop crying, wipe your tears." At that time, she was foolish and ignorant. Xie Yun's words were like cold water poured after mocking her. Her liking for Xie Yun plummeted to the bottom, even reaching a level of disgust. She fiercely wiped away her tears and said to Xie Yun, "You are all the same kind of people, why bother pretending to comfort me?" Later, many things happened, and she married Xie and became hostile to Xie Yun. Later on, it was only known that he was deposed from the throne by the Zhou government and demoted to a commoner. It's strange to say that even after decades, she still remembers this. It only rained a few days ago, and the mountain road was muddy and slippery, making it difficult to walk. Qingming gently draped his cloak over Xie Yun's body and continued, "Miss, why are you going to Nanshan now?" Xie Yun stepped on the muddy road and said lightly, "Pray for blessings." After speaking, she looked up towards the north and saw her loyal father and brother, now hanging their swords in front of the hall, guarding the 8 directions for the Zhou family. And this week, the family secretly planned to take their lives. The girl misses the master and the young master, right? Qingming smiled and said, "Yesterday when I went to Madam's place, I heard Sister Handan say that in a few days, the master and his team will be specially summoned to Beijing." Xie Yun burst into a rare smile, and the heavy pressure on her heart dissipated quite a bit. In her past life, she was framed and had no choice but to receive the Empress's decree and marry Zhou. Her father rushed back 800 miles and was unable to stop her from marrying into the Zhou family. Unfortunately, she was blind. Looking at Zhou, who looked like a dog, she fell in love with him in just a few days. The Xie family was already in a difficult position to maintain, but she pulled the Xie family to participate in the crown prince's succession. In the end, the Xie family ended up with a tragic death. Xie Yun took a deep breath and suppressed the evil thoughts in her heart. In this life, she was not married to Zhou, and people with 2 or 3 bedrooms were unable to restrain her. Everything is still in time, people with torn faces are safer than evil beasts hiding in the dark. Girl! Girl! Qingming saw Xie Yun start to daydream again and couldn't help but urgently call out. Xie Yun regained her senses, glanced at Qingming, tightened her cloak, and said, "Let's go." The temples in Nanshan are managed by the royal family, and on weekdays, high-ranking officials and dignitaries go up the mountain to burn incense. Along the way, Xie Yun met many acquaintances, but they all avoided Xie Yun. Just as the 2 of them were climbing halfway up the mountain, a few ragged peasant women walked towards them, holding hoes and sickles in their hands. Suddenly, Xie Yun stopped and stared at the peasant woman for a while. One of the peasant women had a few scattered drops of blood on her feet. Xie Yun was shocked in her heart. She thought the killer should be a man with agile physique, but unexpectedly, it was a peasant woman. When the peasant woman left, Xie Yun didn't care about anything else and urgently explained to Qingming. "Hurry down the mountain and go find Jing Zhaoyin. Just say that the crown prince has been assassinated and his life is in danger." Qingming nodded and asked urgently, "Girl, where are you going?" "Don't worry about me, hurry down the mountain." Xie Yun pulled out the dagger hidden in her leg and stuffed it into Qingming's hand. "No matter what, protect yourself." After speaking, she started running up the mountain. Xie Yun didn't care about the eyes of others. If she could save next week's inkstone here, her Xie family would have another chance of survival. As long as she can save next week's inkstone, Zhou, this little person, never want to turn over in this lifetime. The South Mountain is so big. Xie Yun kept searching for the chaotic stone forest in the south mountain before seeing scattered blood droplets on the ground. Seeing blood droplets, Xie Yun was overjoyed and found the right place. As she continued walking towards the depths of the chaotic stone forest, suddenly a ghostly voice came from an unnamed corner. "Who is it?" Xie Yun was startled by the sound and immediately drew out another short knife, carefully staring around. There are scattered stones here, and she can hide anywhere. She dare not gamble. She is not sure if the person making the sound is the killer or the seriously injured Zhou Yan. Xie Yun shouted, "Come out." Xie Yun leaned closer and closer to the place where the sound had just been heard, and for some reason, her heart became even more nervous. "Stop." A low voice with a hint of warning came from her left side, hoarse yet extremely magnetic, full of masculine aura. Suddenly, a wind arose and Xie Yun smelled a strong smell of blood. "Are you injured?" Xie Yun ignored the warning words, her mind was filled with only one thought, whether this person was Zhou Yan or not. Are you a doctor?" The man in the dark looked at the bleeding wound in his abdomen and took a deep breath. "It's a minor injury, it's okay," he said. "That's right, I'm a doctor, I also have medicine." Xie Yun put away her short knife, and now she is certain that the person in the dark is Zhou Yan. The man's pitch-black eyes lit up strangely upon hearing this, leaning against the stone and staring at the girl across from him with interest. Listening to her words, her thin and cool lips stirred up a meaningful smile. "Are you a doctor?" The man's tone was casual, and there seemed to be a smile between his eyebrows and eyes. He said lightly, "I don't believe it." Xie Yun was stunned for a moment and remained silent. After a while, a rustling sound sounded in the dark, and a tall figure walked from the darkness. Xie Yun was momentarily stunned when she saw the man's appearance. The cold and handsome face is like the most perfect work of heaven, and those evil and charming cold-speaking eyes are like a cold and calm deep pool. The man looked at Xie Yun with a stunned expression, smiled slightly, and calmly walked to the side to sit down, his long legs bent. Xie Yun calmly looked at the man covered in scars. In her past life, she rushed around and knew very little about Zhou Yan. Unexpectedly, after growing up, this person was so handsome and unparalleled. Xie Yun turned her head and said lightly, "You're hurt very badly." The man lowered his eyes and his abdomen and legs were covered in blood red, but he surprisingly felt no pain at all. 2 words overflow from the thin lips. "Minor injury. I have medicine that can save you." Xie Yun gritted her teeth. "You have lost too much blood now. If you don't stop the bleeding again, your life is in danger. How are you going to save me?" The man squinted his eyes. "You promised me 3 demands before I saved you." She stared straight at Zhou Yan and continued, "I'm not taking the opportunity to blackmail you, but I can't save you for nothing. After all, being a person should be selfish. Being selfish is what Zhou Ji once said to her. I promise you." Zhou Yan leaned weakly against the stone, barely tugging at the corner of his mouth, revealing a weak smile and an indescribable evil charm in his half-narrowed eyes. Xie Yun immediately squatted down, regardless of gender, and tore open the blood clothes on Zhou Yan's body. Looking at the wound with continuous blood flow and skin turning outwards, Xie Yun, who was mentally prepared, was also startled. "Hurt so badly. Surprisingly still alive." Xie Yun quickly calmed down and reached out to take off Zhou Yan's pants, but was held down by Zhou Yan. He said, "I understand the girl's eagerness to save people, but there's no need for that, right?" "What?" Xie Yun looked up at him in confusion. "Men and women are different, I'll take them off myself." Zhou Yan's handsome face was covered in a light smile, and his pitch-black eyes were so deep that one couldn't see any emotion. Xie Yun remained expressionless as she watched Zhou Yan clean herself, leaving only a pair of blood-stained underwear. In her past and present lives, Xie Yun, who had never had any intimate contact with any male, went blank in her calm mind when faced with someone's undisguised frivolity. Even though she has married someone, she has always treated Zhou Ji with respect and has never had intimate contact. Xie Yun frowned and pondered for a moment. Subconsciously treating someone's shameless behavior as a means of healing. Let's get started. Zhou Yan's voice was hoarse, with a muffled tone that was inexplicably sexy. Upon hearing this, Xie Yun's whole body tightened. She never felt so nervous and flustered before. After struggling for a while, she finally cleaned up the blood stains on Zhou Yan's wound, then took out a sachet and sprinkled the hemostatic powder on the wound. Then he tore off his clean clothes and quickly bandaged the wound for Zhou Yan. Zhou Yan looked uncontrollably at the girl's hand, her fair and delicate back resembling delicate white porcelain, but at this moment, it wrapped around her legs, appearing particularly ambiguous and charming. His fingers tightened slightly, and his pitch-black pupils gradually dilated. Looking at Xie Yun's drooping head, Zhou Yan squinted her eyes, revealing a hint of darkness in the pitch black. "I'm curious, how did you know I was injured here?" Deep laughter, with a mesmerizing magnetism, sounded from above. Xie Yun, who was dressing the wound, was slightly taken aback, but didn't speak, just quickly finished the dressing. The strong smell of blood stimulated her nasal cavity, and Xie Yun frowned and dodged to the side. Seeing her raise her hand to cover her mouth and nose, Zhou Yan's smiling eyes froze and a slight crack appeared on her face. "Don't like the smell of blood?" he asked lightly. "Yes." In the next second, Xie Yun felt that Zhou Yan was closer to her. "I don't like it. I'm sorry." Zhou Yan looked at Xie Yun, who had repeatedly avoided him, and a wicked smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Suddenly, his tall figure suddenly fell into Xie Yun's arms. The pungent bloody smell between the noses suddenly became thick, and with every breath, it was all bloody. Xie Yun exploded her hair. "Get up." Then, pushing the person away with force, Xie Yun awkwardly dodged to the side. Seeing her look like a frightened kitten, Zhou Yan found it very funny. His seductive black eyes were raised, with a deep and shallow emotion that was hard to see. He fixed his gaze on her, and his tone was casual. "I'm not even angry if you take a look at my whole body. I just rely on you. As for being so angry..." Xie Yun immediately looked at him with a look of surprise in her clear eyes. "What are you talking about?" Zhou Yan leaned back casually, his gaze fixed on her for a few seconds, until Xie Yun felt a bit uneasy when he looked away. The voice was very light, with a warm and magnetic tone that carried a hint of calculation. "You saved me. In theory, I should have pledged my life in order to repay your life-saving kindness." Xie Yun didn't react for a moment, and her tone suddenly increased. "What is it?" "Promise with one's own body." "What Zhou Yan is saying," I said, "I want to make a promise with my own life." Zhou Yanfei's thin and crimson lips curled up, revealing an impeccable gentle smile, making her handsome face even more noble and elegant. Xie Yun looked up at him, her eyes facing each other. "Girl! Girl! Where are you?" Suddenly, the hurried cries of Qingming interrupted the silent and charming conversation between the two. Upon hearing this, Zhou Yan's expression immediately sank and his eyebrows furrowed slightly. "I won't come early or late, but unfortunately, I will come at this time." Chapter 9. Kill the Rooster as a warning to the monkey. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Xie Yun went down the mountain and returned to Xie Mansion, it was already dark. The Xie Mansion, which was originally lively, is now quiet. Even the Jingyan Hall of Mrs. Xie in the second and third rooms is dark and cannot be seen. Xie Yun snorted and laughed, both of them holding back their big moves. Silence and silence. Just as I walked back into the courtyard, I heard a rough-pitched female voice. "The big girl is my big breasts, why am I also half of her mother? What's wrong with me pawning something?" Lifting her foot in, a middle-aged woman with a bulky physique ran towards her. The woman was plump and swollen, with a rosy and shiny complexion. She was wearing a blue cardigan, which was somewhat outdated in style but made of 90% new material. Her wrists were adorned with heavy silver bracelets. Looking at the silver bracelets, Xie Yun smiled. "What is Grandma Fong doing?" Upon hearing Xie Yun's smiling tone, Grandma Fong suddenly felt a sense of confidence in her heart. Her back straightened, her waist stopped bending, and her voice grew louder. "The girl is back now." The old servant went to clean the house for a while and broke several porcelain bottles. The girl in this courtyard pointed at her nose and scolded her. "When I met the girl, I felt extremely anxious." Coincidentally, Fong Mama relied on Xie Yun's late return and didn't see anything happening inside the house, relying solely on her one-sided words. If the girl in the room comes out to identify, she can bite herself to death and not steal, no one can. If it were Xie Yun from a previous life, she would really have no choice but to let her steal things from this house. But after living a lifetime, her heart grew smaller after several decades. "I can't tolerate it, I can't bear it either. Miss, Grandma Fong is talking nonsense. She just stole a pair of silver bracelets from the house. It's in her hands now." A little girl ran over and angrily pointed at the bracelet on Grandma Fong's hand. Before Xie Yun could speak, Grandma Fong slapped the little girl in the face and angrily scolded, "You're full of nonsense. Open your mouth to falsely accuse me." The slap was loud and heavy, and the little girl's face immediately turned red and swollen. Her eyes were full of grievances, and she covered her face and began to cry. Grandma Fong saw the little girl crying hoarsely and quickly looked up at Xie Yun. But Xie Yun's eyebrows and eyes looked at her coldly, with a deep smile on her face. Grandma Fong was greatly shocked and quickly lowered her head. What a majestic lady. This little girl didn't say anything and just slapped someone in the face. Xie Yun's voice became cold. "Not to mention whether this girl is lying or not, if she beats someone in front of her master, I'm afraid she's using herself as her master, right?" Fong Mama was taken aback for a moment and instinctively shouted, "Miss, you're unjustly accused. Even if the old slave eats the bear's heart and leopard's gallbladder, he dare not exceed it. Is that right?" Xie Yun sneered, "Then Grandma told me, where did you get the silver bracelet in your hand?" "When I was dressing up this morning, I saw a pair of silver twisted bracelets placed on the dressing table." "Qing Ming, go take a look, are you still there?" Upon hearing these words, Grandma Fong immediately became angry in her heart. She has been dominating the Furong courtyard for more than 10 years, and on weekdays, Xie Yun is also being held by her. Setting aside Xie Yun in this courtyard, she is also considered half the master. Besides, behind her is the Qiu family. What is the current identity of the Qiu family? The eldest sister of the second wife is the current Empress Qiu. How to say, the Qiu family is now half a royal relative. The Xie family is a destitute family, and the qualification to visit the Qiu family is not enough. Today, Xie Yun, an unpopular rascal, was actually squeezing herself in front of a yard maid. She spoke in a particularly bad tone, "Miss, isn't that just that you don't trust the old slave? The old slave has been following her for more than 10 years. Who is the old slave? Miss, you still don't know." Bold. Qing Ming stood over and loudly said, "Grandma, are you confused? Who is the master in this courtyard?" Fong Mama was startled and quickly went to see Xie Yun. She quickly explained, "Miss, how dare I? In the past decade or so, I have been serving the girl with all my heart and lungs. I have always regarded the girl as my own child in my heart. Miss, you are aware that the old slave came from the second wife's family, the Qiu family. The Qiu family has the most upright and honest family style. Just now, it was all nonsense from the old slave. You'll just go crazy as the old slave, don't take it to heart." Are you crazy? Xie Yun sneered in her heart, this Granny Fong is really interesting. In just a few words, she wanted to cover up the theft. Are you still moving out of the Qiu family to suppress yourself, afraid that you don't know there is an imperial consort in the Qiu family? Xie Yun sneered from the bottom of her heart. Her second aunt secretly embezzled the Xie family's property, bribed officials, and bullied underprivileged children for the sake of her second uncle's official position. If it were exposed, she gave a faint smile and said calmly, Grandma, as the old saying goes, once you're unfaithful, you don't have to be 100 times. You dare to steal from my head now. In a few days, won't you be stealing from my grandmother's head? I dare not, I dare not. Grandma Fong was greatly surprised. Suddenly, Xie Yun hung a big hat on her head, causing trouble for the old lady. She had to take off a layer of skin if she didn't die. Dare not. I see you dare very much. Xie Yun raised the corner of her lips and said, Someone, hold her down and go get a wooden stick. There are people with unclean hands and feet in this courtyard. As the master, I should be disciplined and disciplined. Grandma Fong's face immediately turned pale with fear and she was about to run out. The girl who was slapped by her just now rushed over with quick eyes and hands, pressing down on her. She cursed loudly, Old lady, you stole my master's belongings and still want to run away. Xie Yun looked coldly at Granny Fong, who was howling and suffering on the ground. I haven't even asked what to do with Granny yet. Granny dares to be so reckless in front of me. Fong Mama pounced and tugged at Xie Yun's skirt, wailing and crying, Miss, the old servant's body is fragile and can't withstand the board. The old slave raised you up, girl. You are really a black-hearted person. You will suffer retribution. Pa. The girl pressing on her immediately slapped her in the face, which was even heavier than the slap from Grandma Fong just now. Qingming's face was fierce as he said, eating things inside and outside. How could you curse your master so much? Even if you kill him, you will not hesitate to die. As he spoke, Qingming pointed at the two women holding wooden sticks and said sternly, You two, pull out this ignorant woman, beat her 100 sticks, and if you swallow your breath, throw her to the outskirts of the city. Show me all the people in the courtyard. If you disobey and bully the master, this is the end. Qingming's voice and colors were fierce, and Fong Mama looked at her with fear in her eyes, unable to say a word. Quickly, Grandma Fong was dragged out of the courtyard, followed by a howling and cursing roar. In the night, the cool breeze was gentle, and the entire lotus courtyard cage was covered in a foul smell of blood. After a while, the old woman holding the staff whispered, Miss, I'm suffocating. Xie Yun nodded and said, Drag it down and leave it in the suburbs. As soon as the words fell, several lights suddenly lit up outside the courtyard, and the person who came was from the second room. Xie Yun looked over, her eyes darkened, and a wet nurse had died. Surprisingly, her second aunt would come to her small courtyard with great enthusiasm. Xiao looked at Fong Mama, who had been beaten to a pulp in the corner, feeling both shocked and angry. The person who took her family 10 years to bury was killed in just a short while. What's wrong with Yun Yang? Xiao pursed her lips and looked at Xie Yun, her face full of worry, and her tone was incredibly affectionate, saying. Just now, I heard the people in the courtyard say, You wet nurse's hands and feet are not clean, you really should be beaten. You don't hesitate to die. Xie Yun quickly walked over and carefully took Qiu-Shi's hand. Aunt Air, you won't blame Yun Yang for being ruthless, will you? Speaking of which, Grandma Fong is also a person from your courtyard, and after all, she is also from the Qiu family. I just let my mother-in-law hit me a few times, but unexpectedly, this person died, and Yun Yang's heart was also filled with sadness. This kind of evil slave, not only from my courtyard, but also from my grandmother's courtyard, is also damn. In order to appease Xie Yun, Qiu had to coax her. The next moment, Xie Yun had a sneer on her face and followed Qiu-Shi's words, Aunt Air is right. She's just a servant, she'll die if she dies. Qiu's teeth are tight and his heart is sore with anger, this slut. Xie Yun noticed her angry expression and immediately smiled in her heart. I killed your person, you still have to praise me. Qiu, does this taste good? Chapter 10. Punishing Evil Sisters. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. After seeing off Qiu Shi, Xie Yun finally got rid of exhaustion and almost fell into bed without wanting to move. Remembering the fierce eyes of Qiu Shi before leaving, Xie Yun felt inexplicably excited. A mother fawn who had been in ambush for 10 years had died, and Qiu Shi was definitely unwilling to accept it. And what she was waiting for was Qiu and Li, who came to her door with their minions and teeth to seek their way to death. The first one is Grandma Fong, who can be considered as a servant who died unjustly in worship of the Xie family. So, who's next? The next morning, the Qiu family brought a mother-in-law named Zhang. Miss, the old servant only came out of the palace yesterday and was in a hurry. I've been arguing with you this morning, so I'm really anxious. Zhang Mama looked young, but she had a kind face. Even if she didn't smile, it was pleasing to see. Xie Yun leans against Arhat's bed, hears the words, sees Mammy Zhang, and pauses for a while. From the palace. Qiu's speed is really extraordinary. Grandma Fong only breathed a sigh of relief last night, and people were arranged to come in this morning. She said indifferently, Mama is too worried. Although I have a bad temper, I am still a reasonable person. This courtyard is big or small, and there are many people living in it. I am lazy, and all of them are the first-class girls around me who manage the Qingming festival. Mammy, you just arrived. If you don't understand, just find her. After speaking, Xie Yun dozed off in a daze. Kneeling on the ground, Grandma Zhang buried her head lower and shook her body like a sieve, but she didn't say a word anymore. Xie Yun, who pretended to sleep, saw this scene and her heart froze. What came out of the palace was extraordinary. At this moment, Qingming walked lightly and carefully helped up Mama Zhang. The girl is asleep, Mama, let's talk outside, she said. Zhang Mama looked at Xie Yun in panic and respectfully followed Qingming out. After the two of them left, Xie Yun opened her eyes and began to ponder carefully. Since the palace is willing to send someone out, it indicates that Consort Qiu is openly interfering in the affairs of the Xie family's residence. She killed the people of the Qiu family and humiliated her face. The Qiu family wants to suppress the Xie family in everything, how can they sit still? With this in mind, Xie Yun's eyes flashed with a hint of ferocity. 1, she killed one, 2, she killed a pair. Impossible. Xie Yun is so articulate now, how could she take a nap in front of you? Zhang Mama furrowed her brows and said, no matter how cruel the big girl is, she is still a 14-year-old girl. She was raised in front of the old lady and you, without the guidance of a teacher. She is arrogant and has a promiscuous character. Perhaps she was angry a few days ago and lost her temper. Qiu frowned and pondered for a moment. Xie Yun's changes in the past few days didn't seem like she was losing her temper. It's possible that Cui secretly taught her. Madam, you are still cautious and cautious. Although Cui Shi did not act, she is still the mother of the young lady. You and the Empress Dowager have injured Prince Rongan. Qiu Shi glanced coldly at her, and Zhang Mama realized that it was not good. She immediately fell silent and said, I have been too talkative. Please forgive me, madam. Why King Qiang+Shuangwen died in the war in that year. Qiu's sisters know very well that Mammy Zhang, as the close personal person of concubine Qiu, also knows a lot. Although there are no outsiders at the moment, we must not let others know about what happened back then. Qiu sneered and said, watch your mouth for me. I'm not as kind as my sister. Grandma Zhang sweated like rain and remained silent like a cicada. Qiu held hot tea at hand and said, the girl named Qingming next to Xie Yun has kept a close eye on the Furong courtyard. This time, it was Fong Mama's death that she was beating us. If there is a murder case, anyone with some insight in this family will be staring at the Furong courtyard. Just keep an eye on it quietly. Madam, don't worry, said Mama Zhang repeatedly. Qiao sure thought of Fong Mama's situation and still felt strange in her heart. It's strange to say that Fong Mama has stolen more than once or twice. This time, she only stole a pair of silver bracelets. Without saying a word, Xie Yun killed the person. Before Zhang Mama came to the Xie family, she learned about this matter and said calmly, "You are aware that Fong Mama stole it. Even if you steal it once or twice, the young lady can tolerate it. But over time, stealing the silver bracelet may have angered the young lady." Listening to Zhang Mama's words, Qiu's doubts in her heart were dispelled. It's also possible. I reminded Grandma Fong before that just a little fuss is enough, and she even got used to stealing. This time, she deserves it. As he was speaking, Xie Qing walked in and said, "Mother, be careful that the walls have ears." Looking at the white veil on Xie Qing's forehead, Qiu Shi inexplicably became angry and said, Qing, did Xie Yun really not push you?" When it came to this matter, Xie Qing's hypocritical and gentle face shattered completely. "Mother, Xie Yun really didn't push me, it was all that groom's fault." Qiu took her hand and comforted her, saying, Don't be angry, don't be angry. I have already driven the groom out of the Xie family by breaking his limbs, and I am somewhat angry for you. The damn groom just broke his limbs. My mother should have skinned him off to relieve my anger. Xie Qing touched the wound on his forehead and complained, Xie Yun is really crazy. She actually killed the grandmother who has nurtured her for more than 10 years, but unfortunately, she is still a mother's person. My mother can swallow this, but I can't swallow it. Qiu quickly grabbed her and said, Don't act recklessly, that little slut is very evil. As she spoke, Qiu suddenly smiled and said, Recently, your third uncle Xie Shu has been out of school and staying indoors feeling stuffy. Go and talk to her. Her words were meaningful, and Xie Qing looked up at her. The mother and daughter smiled at each other, with a calculating expression in their eyes. Ah! This hibiscus courtyard is so dilapidated and desolate. Surprisingly, it's where our elder sister lives. Isn't this bullying people? In the Furong courtyard, Xie Yun, who was sharpening her knives under the eaves, raised her head upon hearing this and stared closely at the gate. Qing Ming, who was wiping his knife next to him, was also stunned for a moment. It had only subsided for a whole morning, and someone came to stir up trouble in the afternoon. The person who came was Xie Shu, the eldest daughter of the Li family in the third room. She was wearing a blue long-sleeved shirt with a standing collar and a slanted collar. She looked obedient and gentle, and was originally a likable face. Unfortunately, Xie Shu only loves bright red and heavy makeup, with a pair of thick eyebrows paired with a deep red lip color, making her personality appear harsh and domineering. She didn't enter the door and stood on the threshold, speaking harshly, Big sister, you can only live in such a dilapidated courtyard. Upon hearing these words, Qingming's face slightly changed. The Furong courtyard was specially built by the master for the young lady. How could it turn into a dilapidated courtyard in the mouth of the third girl? Xie Yun glanced at her and smiled faintly. The sun is coming out from the west. It's strange that third sister will come to my courtyard today. Third sister. Whose sister are you? Xie Shu sneered coldly and looked at Xie Yun with a disdainful expression on her face. She sternly said, You're dressed in coarse linen, behaving impolitely. I don't know, but I thought you were a fool from a rural village. You deserve to be my sister too. Speaking up is really hilarious. Xie Shu had a fierce face and looked at Xie Yun with unfriendly eyes. Her expression was full of hatred and disgust, no different from her previous life. Once upon a time, Xie Yun didn't understand how Xie Shu would hate her so much. Whenever Xie Shu insulted her, she would comfort herself. She is the eldest daughter of the Xie family, and as the elder sister, she should be more magnanimous, so she will endure all kinds of difficulties from Xie Yun. Later on, she realized that her third uncle was not up to par and that Xie Yun, the legitimate daughter, was not doing well in everything. Therefore, she only dared to bully her parents, the foolish and brainless elder sister. Coupled with Xie Qing's secret instigation of discord, Xie Yun grew even more disgusted with herself. Xie Yun was not a kind person, so when she bullied herself, she never showed any mercy to her subordinates. Xie Yun raised the sharpened knife and looked coldly at Xie Yun by the door. Repeat what you just said. I was busy earlier and didn't hear clearly. Xie Yun's back cooled as she looked at the shiny knife in Xie Yun's hand, holding her breath in her throat, unable to move up or down. As Xie Yun finished eating, a warm and gentle voice suddenly sounded. Third sister, can you also criticize big sister? I really don't understand any rules.